She didn't belong to Harrow. That was the thing Juno repeated to herself every morning when she walked past his office. 2 black coffees balanced in one hand and a stack of shipping invoices in the other. She was an employee, a very well-paid one. The kind who knew where the bodies were buried, sometimes literally, and who had learned, over 3 careful years, that the only safe posture inside these walls was to see everything and feel nothing. She was excellent at it, mostly. Until the Tuesday he walked past her desk without saying her name. Harrow always said her name, not a greeting, not warmth, just a precise acknowledgement. The way a man confirms a tool is still where he left it. Juno. 1 syllable. Flat. She had stopped noticing it until it was gone. She looked up from her screen. He had already disappeared into his office. The heavy door clicked shut. No assignment, no eye contact, no Juno. She went back to her spreadsheet. She told herself it meant nothing. 3 years was a long time to work for a man who ran half the Port Authority's administrative contracts, while running the other half of something entirely different. Juno had not known, exactly, what she was walking into when she took the job. She'd been 26, working double shifts at a hotel accounting desk, paying off her mother's medical debt in increments so small they barely registered. A woman named Ansel, cool, professional, no last name offered, had found her through a reference from her community college finance professor and sat across from her in a midtown coffee shop and slid a job description across the table. Senior financial analyst, private holdings firm, salary in the high 6 figures. Juno had read the number twice, then she'd read the NDA attached to the back. What exactly do I not talk about? She'd asked. The origin of certain assets, Ansel had said pleasantly. Juno had thought about her mother's hospital bill, about the credit card she'd maxed out, replacing the engine on her 15-year-old car. She thought about all the accounting firms she'd applied to that previous year, the ones that had looked at her degree from a state school, her address in a bad zip code, her complete absence of connections, and sent form rejections. She'd signed. She understood what Harrow was within the first month. Not because anyone told her. Numbers didn't lie. Shell companies had signatures. Wire transfers left echoes. She could read a balance sheet the way other people read a face, and what she read in those first weeks was unmistakable. She had never left. The money was real. The work was genuinely interesting in the way only genuinely dangerous things could be. And there was something, she admitted to herself in her most honest moments, about working for a man who never once implied she was anything less than the most competent person in the room. Harrow didn't compliment. He didn't praise. He assigned, expected, and when she delivered, which was always, he moved on to the next problem with the same brisk efficiency. It was the most respect she'd ever been paid. That was not the same as caring about him. She was clear on that. She was less clear on why the silence that Tuesday morning sat in her chest like a bruise. The accounting was routine that week, reconciling Q3 reports for the 3 legitimate construction firms that formed the clean face of Harrow's holdings. She flagged 2 inconsistencies in a subcontractor's invoices, minor overcharging, repeated, and printed the summary and left it in the tray outside his office at 4 p.m., as she always did. At 5:30, she put on her coat and gathered her bag. She had a dinner reservation at 7, a wine bar in the West Village, small and unpretentious. She'd made it 3 weeks ago, back when agreeing to go on a date with Drew had seemed like a reasonable adult thing to do. Drew taught literature at a university in Brooklyn. She'd met him at her neighbor's birthday party in September. He was tall and earnest and laughed at his own jokes, which she normally found grating, but something about his particular brand of self-aware awkwardness had been disarming. He'd texted 3 days later. She'd taken 2 weeks to respond. She was not, as a rule, a woman who went on dates. Her evenings were organized around meal prep and work files, and the specific low-level exhaustion of managing the financial architecture of a criminal enterprise. Romance had always felt like a luxury for people with more slack in their lives. But her mother had called last month, out of nowhere, just to say, "You work too hard. You sound tired. When is the last time someone made you feel something? Juno had not had a good answer. She left the office at 5:30 on the dot. She didn't check whether the light in Harrow's office was still on. Drew brought flowers. She found this both touching and slightly mortifying. Nobody had ever brought her flowers, and accepted them with minimum fuss and signaled the waiter to bring a water glass for them. Drew laughed. She did too, before she could stop herself. It was not a bad evening. Drew was good company, opinionated about things she had no strong feelings about, which meant she could listen without having to perform, and he was visibly delighted by her, which was a sensation so unfamiliar it took her most of the first glass of wine to stop being suspicious of it. At some point, Drew leaned across the table to emphasize a point, and his hand landed over hers on the tablecloth. He didn't make a production of it, just left it there, easy and warm, while he kept talking. She looked at their hands and felt something settle in her chest she couldn't name. She did not know that a man in a dark coat had paused on the sidewalk outside the window. She did not know he had stood there in the cold long enough to see Drew's hand cover hers. She was looking at the flowers in the water glass. She didn't see Harrow at all. The next morning, he said her name. She noticed she had been waiting for it. Juno. He handed her a list of port contacts for the new terminal contract. His face was composed, exactly what it always was. She took the list. Their fingers didn't touch. She told herself everything was normal. She was wrong. Drew texted her Thursday afternoon, mid-sentence on a quarterly audit she was reviewing. "Something's happened. Can you call?" She stepped into the hallway. He answered on the first ring, and the sound of his voice told her before his words did, that hollow quality of someone who had just had the floor pulled out from under them. His university research grant had been suspended pending a financial compliance review. The grant funded his entire department's work for the next 2 years. The review had been triggered by an anonymous complaint filed with the university's ethics board, alleging irregularities in his grant application documentation. "I've never filed anything incorrectly in my life," Drew said. "I'm meticulous. Every receipt, every correspondence, everything documented." "Who filed the complaint?" Juno asked. "They won't say. It came through a third-party compliance firm, Westfield Oversight Associates." She wrote the name on her palm with her thumbnail, pressing hard enough to feel it. "I'll call you back," she said. She went back to her desk. She opened a browser tab she kept private, separate from the company servers. She typed in Westfield Oversight Associates. The LLC was registered in Delaware, incorporated 14 months ago. Its listed managing director was a name she didn't recognize, but the registered agent was a firm she knew well, because she had processed 3 wire transfers through them in the last year on Harrow's behalf. Her hands were very still on the keyboard. She told herself it was a coincidence. She was a numbers person. She knew what that meant. There were no coincidences in ledgers. She spent the next 40 minutes pulling thread. Westfield Oversight Associates shared a registered agent with a holding company called Callaway Bren Investments. Callaway Bren appeared in Harrow's books twice. Once as a vendor, once as a silent partner on a commercial property deal she'd flagged last spring. She pulled the property records, the filing history. By the time she was done, the light outside had gone from grey to dark, and her coffee was cold, and the bruise in her chest from Tuesday morning had spread all the way to her hands. She printed everything, 14 pages, stapled them together, neat and squared, put them in a manila folder, put the folder in her bag. She drove home, she made dinner, she did not sleep. Friday morning, she walked into his office without knocking. Harrow was at his desk, phone to his ear, eyes on the window. He glanced at her and held up one finger. She sat down across from him without being invited. She folded her hands in her lap and waited. He finished his call in 4 sentences. He set the phone on the desk and looked at her. Whatever he saw in her face, he went still. She placed the folder on the center of his desk. "Westfield Oversight Associates," she said. Her voice was level. The compliance firm that filed an anonymous ethics complaint against Drew Alcott's grant at Greenfield University. They share a registered agent with Callaway Bren, which you own through 2 layers of trusts I set up for you personally in April. Harrow looked at the folder. He did not open it. That's a common registered agent, he said. Don't. The word came out quiet and final. She watched his jaw tighten. I run your books. I built those trusts. I know every name in that chain. Don't tell me it's a coincidence. The silence in the room had weight. She could hear the ventilation system. She could hear her own heartbeat. He touched your hand, Harrow said. 3 words, no apology, no deflection, just the blunt, terrible fact of his reasoning offered like it was self-evident, like it explained everything, like it was supposed to. Juno looked at him, flat, dark eyes that never gave anything away, except right now they were giving something away, and she didn't have a name for it, and the not naming of it was somehow worse than everything else. He touched my hand, she repeated. So you had an ethics complaint filed against his research grant, which he spent 4 years building, which funds 12 other people's work. He'll land on his feet. That's not the point. What is the point, Juno? She leaned forward. The point is that you did that because I went on a date, not because he threatened you or crossed into your business, because I went on a date and someone touched my hand and you couldn't stand it. She held his gaze. I want to know if that's what you think you're allowed to do. He didn't answer immediately. Harrow always answered immediately. She watched him look at the folder, and then at the desk, and then at some point near her left shoulder. Yes, he said, that's what I did. Not a defense, not an excuse, just the admission, precise and unadorned. She picked up the folder and put it back in her bag. She stood. I quit, she said. Juno. I'll have the transition documents ready by end of day. I'll stay through Monday to hand off anything critical. She smoothed the front of her jacket. You should have someone pull that complaint before it escalates. Restore the grant funding, but make sure it's clean. No traceable connection. I can write a recommended approach if you want it. But you'll implement it after I'm gone. She walked to the door. I'm not accepting the resignation, he said behind her. It's not a negotiation, she said, and walked out. She spent 2 weeks in her apartment with the cracked grout in the kitchen and the radiator that clanged at 3 a.m. She organized her files. She updated her resume. She had a conversation with Drew, who called to tell her the complaint had been mysteriously withdrawn and the grant reinstated. Full funding, plus an additional equipment allocation. Someone pulled strings, Drew said, bewildered and relieved. I don't know who. That's good, she said, I'm glad. She meant it, she held on to that. She turned down 2 job offers, legitimate firms, glass lobbies, quarterly town halls, colleagues who talked about their weekends, decent salaries. Not Harrow good, but decent. She sat with the offer letters for a long time. She could not make herself sign them. She told herself she needed more time. She told herself the severance was generous enough that she didn't have to rush. She told herself a lot of things over 2 weeks, and she was good enough with numbers to know she wasn't adding up. The call came at 11:40 on a Thursday night. A number she didn't recognize. She answered anyway. Something in the cadence of the late hour felt like a warning she'd already missed. This is Rudd. The driver's voice, low and deliberate. I need to ask you something, and you can say no. You probably should say no. She sat up. Tell me. He got hit tonight. Rival crew, the Denner brothers. He took a round, nothing vital, but he won't let the doctor touch him. Sent him away. He's at the Halstead warehouse alone, and he's... A pause. He's not good, Miss Juno. He sent you to find me. No, firm. He absolutely did not. He told me specifically to leave you out of this. I'm here because I've worked for this man 11 years and I've never seen him like this, and I don't know who else to call. Juno was quiet for a moment. She looked at the offer letters on her kitchen table. Text me the address, she said. The Halstead warehouse smelled like rust and motor oil, and the sharp chemical bite of gunpowder that hadn't finished settling. Overhead lights, industrial and poor, one flickering at the far end, shadows deep enough between the stacked pallets to hide things she didn't want to think about. Harrow was sitting on an overturned crate in the center of the floor, jacket off, one hand pressed to his left side. Blood on his shirt, his hand, the concrete beneath him. He was upright. That was about the best that could be said. He looked up when she stepped through the side entrance. His eyes tracked her across the dim space, and in the half-second before his face locked down, she saw something move through his expression she had never seen there and couldn't categorize. His voice, flat a verdict. "Don't blame him," she said. She set her bag on the cleanest surface she could find and started pulling things out. The first aid kit she'd stopped at a 24-hour pharmacy for, the spare shirt she'd grabbed without thinking, a bottle of water. Her hands were steady. They'd always been steady. "He's loyal to you. That's why he called. You shouldn't be here." "I know." She crossed to him and crouched down. Up close, the wound was high on his left side below the ribs. Bleeding had slowed but not stopped. "Move your hand." He didn't move. He looked at her instead, and she made herself look back, held the contact until he dropped his hand. She went to work. She'd taken a first aid course 3 years ago, before she'd fully understood what working for Harrow would involve, and a trauma response course 18 months in, which she'd told herself was purely professional foresight. She poured antiseptic onto gauze and pressed it to the wound with even, firm pressure, and she did not think about anything except the task directly in front of her. He made a sound through his teeth. His hand came up and closed around her wrist. Not hard, not a grip, just a weight, anchoring. "You fixed the grant," she said. "Yes." "All the way. You gave him more than he had before." It was the right correction. She looked up. He was watching her face with that stripped, exposed quality she'd seen for half a second when she walked in. This close, she could see the lines at the corners of his eyes, the grey at his temple, the old scar that crossed his jaw from some previous night like this one, years before she knew him. She had always categorized this face as unreadable. She was revising that now. "Why?" she said. "Because I was wrong." The words came out like something pushed past considerable resistance. "What I did to him was wrong. You were right. He'd done nothing to deserve it. I acted on," a pause, "on something I don't have a right to." Juno kept pressure on the wound. She looked at the man who had built a financial empire through cold calculation and precise leverage, who had never in 3 years expressed anything she could identify as regret. "You don't do wrong," she said. "You do calculated and necessary. That's your whole operating model." "I know." "So what was that?" He looked at her for a long moment. The flickering light kept its unsteady rhythm. "You know what it was," Harrow said. She did know. She'd known since Tuesday morning, when he walked past her desk without her name, and she felt the absence like something physical. She'd known when she sat in the wine bar with Drew's hand over hers, and felt nothing close to what she felt every morning carrying 2 black coffees past a closed office door. She'd known when she printed those 14 pages and went home and couldn't sleep. She had been counting. She'd always been counting. She just hadn't looked at the total. "This doesn't change what you did," she said. "He's a person. You took his work apart and reassembled it like it was inventory. You can't do that." "I know." "If I come back," she stopped. "Start it again, and I haven't decided that. But if I do, I need something in writing." Harrow blinked. "In writing." "Terms. Not a standard employment contract. My terms. Specifically. You do not involve yourself in any aspect of my life outside this building unless I ask you to. You do not investigate, interfere with, or take action against any person I choose to spend time with. If you have a problem with something I'm doing, you tell me directly." She held his gaze to my face. "Like I'm a person." "You are a person." "Then act like you know it." She taped the bandage down. She sat back on her heels, looking up at him. "I will give you the best work you've ever had," she said. "I do that already. You know my value better than anyone who's ever hired me. It's the only reason I stayed as long as I did. But I am not yours. I don't belong to this building or your business or you. The warehouse was very quiet. Somewhere distant, traffic moved through the night. Agreed, Harrow said. It came out so immediately that she almost didn't trust it. She studied his face. I want it written, she said again. Ansel will draft it Monday. You can write the terms yourself if you'd prefer. I won't change a word. She stood. She stripped off her gloves and dropped them in the plastic bag she'd brought for disposal. She gathered the gauze wrappers, folded them in. Neat, because she was always neat in chaos. It was what she was good at. I want a 10% raise, she added. Something moved in Harrow's expression, small and fast. She almost missed it. Almost. 15, he said. She looked at him. What? You've been underpaid for at least a year. I should have corrected it at the last review. He said it the way he said all financial assessments. Flat, factual, like it cost him nothing to admit. 15. She picked up her bag. She looked at the man on the crate, pale and bleeding, and still, somehow, entirely certain of the outcome of this conversation. She thought about the offer letters on her kitchen table. She thought about Drew's kind, uncomplicated face, and the career she'd built in a world she'd never intended to enter. She thought about 3 years of walking into rooms full of dangerous men and being the one who actually understood the numbers. She thought about the only man in any of those rooms who had never, not once, suggested she understood them wrong. I'll see you Monday, she said. She turned and walked toward the exit. Behind her, she heard the rough exhale of a man releasing a breath he'd been holding for longer than tonight. At the door, she stopped. Rudd will take you to the hospital, she said without turning around. That's not a suggestion. A pause, then, yes. She pushed through the door and walked out into the cold. The parking lot was wet, a light rain starting, the kind that couldn't decide if it meant it. She stood for a moment with her face tilted up at the dark sky. She was not romantic about this. She was not naive about what he was, what this world was, what she'd chosen. Again, by walking back through that door, she had always known the cost of things. It was the only useful skill her particular kind of hard life had ever given her. What she had also always known, though she'd spent 3 years refusing to total it up, was this. She was not standing in the parking lot of a warehouse at midnight because of money. She pulled out her phone and texted Rudd the address of the nearest private trauma clinic. She added, "He'll argue. Don't let him." Rudd responded in 3 seconds. "Understood. Thank you, Miss Juno." She drove home. She took the offer letters off the kitchen table and put them in the recycling. She made tea and sat down with her laptop and wrote out her terms. Every single one, the way she wrote any contract, clear, complete, no ambiguity, no room for reinterpretation. When she finished, she read it back twice. It was the most honest document she had ever produced, and she had produced a lot of documents. She would add the emotional distress fee retroactively. 3 years. She closed the laptop. She sat in the quiet of her apartment and listened to the radiator clang and looked at the dark brick outside the window, and she thought about the definition of a good deal, one where both parties walk away having received fair value. She was not his. She had made that clear, and he had agreed, and she believed him the way she believed anyone who had just been presented with the only terms on the table. But she had come back, and sitting there at her kitchen table, in the particular silence that follows a decision you've already made without admitting it to yourself, she finally let herself look at the total. She'd always known. She was a numbers person. She just hadn't wanted to see what the column added up to. When a woman who's spent her whole life being underestimated finally finds the one place where her value is non-negotiable, she doesn't leave easy, even when she should, even when every reasonable instinct says the door is right there and the life outside it is clean and safe and entirely uncomplicated. Juno didn't go back because she was rescued. She went back because she'd done the math, and for the first time in her life, the math came out in her favor. Was it the safe choice? No. Was it a simple one? Not. But she had never once been built for simple. Tell me in the comments, did Juno make the right call, or did she just negotiate herself into a very expensive cage? Like and subscribe if you want more stories about women who know exactly what they're worth and refuse to take a cent less.